My name is Farley. I'm an experimental social psychologist. At a gathering a couple of years ago, I was with a bunch of my students, and one of them slipped away to take a brief phone call. And another student asked where she went, and someone replied, "Oh, she's talking on the phone with her son. He's 2 years old. She's never been away from him from that long." And 3 women, all in a row, went, "Oh," and did this gesture, which piqued our interest in a really good, fruitful conversation. We're a bunch of social psychologists, and I'm a nonverbal scholar, and nobody had ever documented this gesture before. So we weren't sure if it was gendered, if this is something women do more than men, what it was really all about. But after that moment, we realized that the gesture is ubiquitous. You see it everywhere. One of the big proponents is Lin-Manuel Miranda. This is him on his curtain call from Hamilton. The lovely Maya Angelou. Meghan Markle on a day where she was probably very overwhelmed and very anxious, but also very touched. And Jennifer Lawrence is also a big displayer of the gesture. So this led us to thinking about the fact that the gesture is likely polysemous, meaning it conveys multiple meanings. And based on anecdotal evidence, we predicted that individuals do this probably when they experience an intense range of emotions, and also possibly when they experience empathy for someone else. So there's been very little research done on this gesture. The research that's been done to date has largely focused on its role in communicating sincerity, that people do this when they feel sincerely or when they're honest about their impressions. But we think that there's a lot more to it than that. We think there's a lot more to it than honesty. And so we looked to an embodiment framework. And embodied cognition is this idea that your thoughts and behaviors and cognitions are grounded in your body. And so there's some reciprocal influence over what your body experiences and how that influences your thoughts and feelings. In one fascinating study, the one that's displayed here, the researchers asked people to indicate using a body map where they felt intense physiological reaction when they were experiencing different emotions. So when you're really happy, pixelate the part of your body that you feel autonomic activity. And as you see, the bright orange colors and the yellow colors is where people reported a lot of activity. So for a lot of these intense emotional states, including happiness and pride and love, there's a lot of somatic activity in the heart. And so potentially what's going on is when people experience that intense physiological arousal, they're drawn to that part of their body. So we performed 2 studies to try and investigate the gesture. The purpose of the first study, the studies were twofold. First, we wanted to figure out what people's intuitive meanings were, what they thought the gesture represented. And also we wanted to see if there was a cross-cultural interpretation of the gesture, that there was similarities or differences across cultures. So the first study involved 95 Mechanical Turk workers. Mechanical Turk is an Amazon crowdsourcing network. So we recruited individuals from the United States and from India. We had 95 participants, and you're seeing the exact survey that they participated in. We asked people to replicate the gesture. Put your hand here. Imagine a time in which you experienced this. Describe what was happening at the time. What emotion do you label that to be? And how intense was that emotion on a scale from 1 to 10? And what we found was, aside from this, so you recognize this, Indians are less familiar with the Pledge of Allegiance. So this is something that was highlighted pretty frequently among American participants. If you ignore that, the emotions that were brought forth by both groups of participants were the same emotions in the same ranked order. So what we found was the most frequent association with the gesture was happiness or joy. Interestingly, the second most frequently mentioned was sadness or grief, and then the third was shock. The other thing that we noticed is that people tended to report this intensely experience, such that significantly higher than the midpoint on a 10-point scale. The second study involved asking people to do the gesture and imagine the likelihood that they would engage in that gesture given all these different emotional states. So we found slightly different results when we gave people the exact emotions. These were some of the emotions that were reported. Surprise, touched, she does this all the time, gratitude, and shock. So So we did see some differences, but we still see pretty intense emotional states that people are reporting. So aside from the fact that there's some differences between the two studies, we are finding that even though this has much more to do with emotion than it does necessarily with sincerity, it's intensely felt, and we have some degree of cross-cultural universality. And we're working on a couple studies now. Thank you.